Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security.
We have two guests today on the Cognitive Crucible, actually return guests. First is Dr. Jan Kallberg, who is an assistant professor in political science with the Department of Social Sciences at the United States Military Academy and a research scientist with the Army Cyber Institute at West Point. Also joining us is Colonel Stephen Hamilton, who is a cyber officer and former information systems management officer and former signal officer. Stephen is currently the technical director of the Army Cyber Institute. And for both Professor Kallberg and Colonel Hamilton, their opinions are their own and do not represent the opinions of the Army Cyber Institute, the United States Military Academy at West Point, the United States Army, or the Department of Defense. Jan Kallberg and Stephen Hamilton, welcome back to the Cognitive Crucible.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's great to be on here again.
All right, gentlemen. So the conversation I'd like to have with you this morning centers around a topic that I would imagine a lot of people, including military leaders, might not have given a whole lot of thought to recently, and that is prisoners of war. Jan, you recently co-authored a piece called "In Great Power Wars, Americans Could Again Become POWs." And of course, we will have a link to this in the show notes. Could one of you please set the stage a little bit and tell us why this is something that you think we need to revisit now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing to think about here is that there's a lot of different, if you go back to the Cold War, there was a lot of things that we were concerned about that we stopped being concerned about in the last 20 years with the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. And those concerns that we had back then are different now because since in the last 2 decades, we've had this information explosion where now, everybody rides the internet every single day. And the technology is advanced in such a way that without going back and looking at those kinds of problems in this new lens of now we have this information, we have a blind spot. This is a very kind of critical thing. I mean, I do a lot of research with HF radio, and a lot of people say that's Cold War comms. Well, before we had satellite, beyond the line of sight communications was using HF radio, and now if you look at HF radio today, there's some amazing things that you can do because of the digital technology, adding digital comms to HF communication. So I think looking at the POW aspect of what we had these concerns before nowadays is really interesting, because now we're looking at these concepts of what is real anymore. You see something on the internet, and like that commercial where it's like, oh, well, I've saw it on the internet, so it must be true, and adding to that machine learning and some of these new technologies of making things seem real that aren't, being able to do these deep fakes, being able to do these kinds of things, adding that to this complex problem of POWs presents like quite an interesting challenge that I think that we need to take a look at least in the sense of revising the policies and the way that we go about this problem.
Yeah. Jan, do you think you could hit some of the key points in your article?
So a few things we're seeing that even in a really complicated operations as we see now with multi-domain operations, and it doesn't matter if it's successful or not, there will be spots where resistance is futile, and people get caught, they have to abandon aircraft, they get ambushed, and they fulfill their contract, and we're not asking people to go further than that, and they can continue to fight as POW, and they might end up as being POWs. And we also look, if we look on, for instance, on the TRADOC pamphlet 52531-3-1 that talks about multi-domain operations in 2028, they have a strong emphasis on this initial stage of combat where a force rapidly take ground, and forward deployed units might be overrun. A bit like Task Force Smith in the Korean War, early deployment overrun by a huge adversarial force. And in that context, we start to see that the numbers of POWs might be in the hundreds. It's not going to be the Battle of the Bulge, where suddenly 20,000 Americans were captured on one single day, because it's a different fight. But we can see that there might be numerous POWs, and then we see that the way we look at it has not pretty much not changed the last 30 years. Meanwhile, as Stephen pointed out, the whole information environment is a complete different creature compared to the 80s.
Okay, that's great, fellas. So I'd like to extend the concepts in your article, Jan. And so since this is the Cognitive Crucible podcast, how would you connect looming POW considerations and military planning requirements and personnel training with cognitive considerations?
So it's highly likely that the POWs, if they're vulnerable, and there's a regime that with less respect for the basic laws of war and so forth, conventions, that will seek to exploit POWs and in different ways. Also, with today's technology, it gives far more opportunities to quickly determine who is of interest. For instance, I was around during the Cold War. The concept was very simple. You get captured, try to hold 3-4 hours, that they don't identify you as a person of tactical information. Then the space have changed, and it's after 24 hours, it's okay if you crack. So, but today, with facial recognition, harvested information, the OPM breach, all the information assets they have, they can pinpoint you very quick at very close to the engagement, maybe. That means that they can separate rapidly who is an information assets from who's not, and focus interrogation and maybe violence on those who are information assets, who still carry tactical information that they want to retrieve in any form or fashion. And that's to us a concern. Also a concern is deep fakes, where they utilize the faces and the personalities of captured personnel to create fake videos that maybe state that they've been part of war crimes and so forth, to undermine. Also plea to their families, to plea to Congress to end the hostilities, and seek to undermine our will to fight. That taken in account is also a question with these deep fakes and so forth, the safety of individual service members. If the adversary utilizes a service member for deep fakes, there's a high risk that he will not return alive. Because then, of course, he would say that this I was forced to is all lies. So there's different aspects here that I think is worth noting and addressing it. And we all know that from the 50s was the big peak of POW movies, that leaders of characters hold their comrades together in captivity. And we think it's really important for officers and so forth, seeing this is a role that you might have to take upon yourself to be the rock in captivity. We also read quite a bit from the 60s. It has studies of Korean War POWs, and one of the reactions from the Korean War POWs was that they were not prepared for facing captivity for maybe several years. And this mental preparation, it could happen, we think is important. That was a little how I connected to the cognitive part.
Right. When you two were on the podcast earlier, you talked about force protection and the will to fight, not only at the individual service member level, but also at the societal level. And so that's one of the major battlefield shifts that we've experienced, is that instead of fighting in far off lands, everywhere is a battlefield now, because we all have access to the world's library in our pockets. So in a POW context, how do you think that enemies of the West are, quote unquote, prepping the battlefield now, would you say?
Well, they harvest information, so they have it. And I think they structure it. And a major manufacturing company in Asia is right now tracking 1.3 billion of their own citizens with facial recognition and creating social points for them. Why would stop them from creating some sort of social points for tracking our personnel?
If we want to take a look at what can be done, I mean, really, if we look at the political scene, I mean, you have like, you know, every political figure, they're going back to their high school time and pulling up, you know, photos of them doing silly things or whatever. It's really no different. I mean, if we can go back and start pulling data and that stuff that's not even, you know, people are pulling up just because it's out on the web or it's been archived, it's no different than our adversary being able to just, you know, when they find some, let's say they get a POW, they'll be able to pull up everything from that past, or maybe they already are saving it now. And that would be what you were talking about, John, is this prep, information prep of the battlefield. If they're figuring out, okay, we need to start tracking all of these senior leaders and finding out everything from the past, they could already have that saved. So we can't go back and erase things that are, once it's out on the web, it becomes like the permanent record.
Could one of you talk a little bit about how the military conducts POW training and personnel training now, and talk a little bit about how we might want to start considering information related vulnerabilities and challenges, and being sure that those considerations are incorporated more into our force protection and POW related outlook?
Yeah, so I think the traditional military has been using the SERE schools. Different services have them. I know that it's common for pilots. Like I remember when I was a cadet, there were some of the cadets here at West Point that got a chance to go to the Air Force Academy for SERE school, and they learn you know, all the aspects of being captured, and then how do you get out of that, and survival skills as far as how you know what you have to eat, you know, how do you find food on your own, you know, all of the different aspects of it. And
right, for our audience that might not be familiar, SERE stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape Training. That's what that acronym is. So sorry,
right,
Stephen.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is some aspect of it of using information in there, but I think that we really need to take a hard look at what information can be used against you. It doesn't matter who you are, what you know, if you're a soldier or not. I mean, if you're captured, there's some LinkedIn profile, there's some Google profile, there's some aspect of your existence in the digital realm out there, and the adversary is going to use that against you, and that's going to be more of a problem, you know, as we create bigger digital footprints of ourselves in the future. And you know, everything from, I mean, we've probably seen the reports a few years ago of soldiers were being tracked just because of their Garmin Forerunner that they had on their wrist, and you could see this is where their run routes are on their base camp, because they go running with it, and all they're trying to do is, you know, understand their own fitness level, and here's you know, this information that's out there that's being saved on the internet that anyone can access. And so I think that being cognizant of that and not the SERE school is like a specialized school for people that are high risk of potentially being captured, and this information is being saved on everyone. So regardless of if you're a high risk person or not, and as we've seen, in the past, the few POWs, the Jessica Lynch, the Bo Bergdahl, I mean, these kind of what I hate to call them one-offs, but it's a very small amount that have happened. But these were not people that their jobs would traditionally require SERE training. So it's even if we said, let's incorporate this information into the SERE school, I don't even know if that's really the right answer, because really we need kind of general training across the services of, hey, your digital footprint is something you're going to carry with you when you go somewhere. And if you try to tell an adversary that captures you, you're not in the military, well, they're going to find, some Facebook profile of you in uniform, or some bio on the web that has all of the units you've been assigned to. So it's going to be a very difficult thing to get away from as we continue to create these digital footprints on the web.
Right. Several years ago, there was publicly facing hygiene protocols, I suppose, for information. So, like for those in our audience not affiliated with the military, frequently commands have the bios for the commanding officer, the executive officer, the sergeant major frequently. And those bios recap everything that those service members have done during the course of their career, including their awards. But years ago, it used to also include some personal information. This person is married to so-and-so, they have 3 kids, Jimmy, Johnny, and Sally. And that kind of stuff has been taken off of military bios years ago. And I think it's really uncommon to see that kind of stuff now. But the point I think that you're making, Stephen, is that that doesn't matter anymore with social media. Even if someone is practicing impeccable hygiene on their social media and they're not, they don't have that information in their profiles, there are algorithms, these social network algorithms these days, that have various different nearness statistical measures. And so you can make inferences about who the people are that are closest to other people based upon these types of proximity network measures. Like you said, Stephen, coming at this in a direct manner, like we're going to tell people, do not put your loved ones in the same picture as you, or do not tag your loved ones in social media posts. That's probably insufficient, because there's ways of discovering that information otherwise. Would you say that that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I think not everybody thinks about is it's not just social media. I mean, it is, if you have a smartphone, it has a GPS in it. And when you drive somewhere, like I know that, Google will be like, hey, you visited this place, this last time, do you want to review it? And it knows exactly that I was there. So that data exists somewhere. So if somebody gets a hold of that data, they could figure out, I could create a web presence that's completely vanilla that says that I'm just Stephen Hamilton, some guy that lives in New York. Well, if somebody pulls that data, all of a sudden they see that I'm driving from my house to West Point every day. Well, that means that I'm some kind of West Point employee of some kind, which means I work potentially for the DoD. And if they see that I go to the PX, that means that I'm a person that has PX privileges. So now it puts me in the category of either being active duty or retired. And so you don't even have to post anything to have this data that's collected on you. And I think that's the part that not everybody thinks about. I mean, even, let's say that I decide to go, not even use a smartphone, but every once in a while I post some pictures of just scenery, no people in it at all. those pictures are geotagged, you know, so now it's like, well, you know that I was physically there at this time because there's a lat long that's associated with this picture that's on the web. So, I mean, there's all these little nuanced data collection things that we don't really think much of that are out there. And you know, if an adversary were to get a hold of Google data, which it would not surprise anyone, I think, at this time that these things happen, then you know, they can aggregate it. They can go through some machine learning, or I mean, just straight statistical thing. Maybe it's just it doesn't even have to be too complex, and you're able to discern a lot of information about a person.
So I like to add a little, John, there. You know, they have all the right on the planet to push you to surrender name, grade, and date of birth and registration number. They can do that with Article 17 in the Third Geneva Convention. And if you don't play along, you can slide out to the territory where you don't have convention protection, and you don't want that. But, you know, because you're not dealing with Florence Nightingale and Mother Teresa, so you better follow the protocol. So you don't want them given the opportunity to go nasty. So you follow what's said in Article 17, give them name, grade, date of birth, and so forth. Okay, so they have that kit to know who you are. Then they just add on the whole kit, as Stephen mentioned, the whole package, who you are, what you're doing. And as mentioned by you and Stephen is the algorithm part, and which is concerning that they can actually pre-conflict assess if you're crackable or not. I would say that we're maybe at that point soon, if not already. So the Russian intelligence services, for instance, they ran German journalists who would be better receive a Russian influence operation. So as they talk to, you know, regular covert intelligence operation, human, when they say approach, they don't need to approach. They can just assess your sentiment over time using how you present things and what type you relate to things. So if they do that, they can also maybe get an assessment, especially on those, you know, narrow high-risk groups or high-value groups where they can assume sentiment-wise where they are. And I think that's maybe a direction too. And they can use that data that Stephen says is aggregated and get a good sense. And then they're already doing the social point system on their own population. So, I mean, they've been training on it.
Right. I'm sure that there is extensive literature on prisoner of war matters and how prisoner of war dynamics affect the tactical, operational, and strategic levels of conflict. I'm not familiar with that literature at all, but I'm envisioning some kind of like a triad where a service member has been taken prisoner of war, and then that can be used to affect the morale of the service member, but it can also be used to affect the morale and the will to fight of that service member's family and loved ones and community back home. And we were talking about how algorithmically, in ways that were less possible 50 years ago, 100 years ago.
And faster.
I identify who those people are on the home front who can be influenced and terrorized with horrific deep fake videos potentially about that service member, true or not, but then also affecting the strategic level considerations of the West or the combatants. So it is
as Stephen mentioned, you know, just the data itself looks pretty innocent as it is, but when you start looking at it, you got 400 POWs. They maybe come from 200 different congressional districts. Through the data aggregation, social media, you have ministers, you got churches, you got community groups that's related to this person. You know, you got other family members with influential positions. You can pretty much create pretty quick, within 48 hours, get a picture how you can utilize these POWs in a way to undermine the will to fight on the home front.
Right. And just as you were saying a few moments ago, Jan, how pre-fight And I recognize that we are actually in an information fight right now. So saying pre-fight, I mean pre-kinetic fight. Pre-fight, you can identify potentially people who are especially influenceable or information assets. But after people have been captured, you can identify those same kinds of people within the society that are related to that person and use influence in order to drive those people into worrisome mind states about call to arms, action against the government to do something right away because my loved one or my friend is captured. And all of this can go sliding in a worrisome direction very quickly.
And it's as Westmoreland said about Vietnam, people watching TV at home can be terribly confusing. I don't know if Westmoreland is the correct reference, but I think it's a good point though that it's when people see it, if you watch TV, you're saying TV, the people of fire, outbound fire, they come across as aggressors, and I mean, and that's the 60s. And today this can be tweaked, and as you say, they can assess where and how to play it. And they want to create noise, they want to create cleavage, which they worked really hard on with information operations, influencing elections, supporting supremacist groups that they have done, FBI have verified. So I think they spent a lot of time studying how they can undermine the US cohesion.
Yeah, I think I'd like to say that, the whole adage of a picture's worth 1,000 words, it's something that we need to revisit a little, because, you can, the imagery is what really kind of makes people change things. I mean, I remember distinctly when I was in Iraq, and, this picture started circulating of it was like a piece of shrapnel or something that hit a soldier was wearing, I think he was wearing like Oakley's or some kind of high-end protective eyewear, and it was stuck in the, I vividly remember this. It was stuck in the eye protection, and you could see that it protected. I mean, you could visibly just look at this pair of eye pro, and you could see that it protected his eyes from that shrapnel. And immediately, we just all got issued like Oakley's. Like, it was just like, it was a knee-jerk reaction. It was like, oh, we have the funds, we can protect soldiers' eyes, let's just do this. And so it was, like I said, a picture's worth 1,000 words. When that one thing circulated, people were, the general officers or whoever at the time saw this and was like, wow, this is something that's really important. And this soldier was wearing this eye pro, and we just need to issue something like this to all soldiers. Now we can protect people's eyes. And maybe it did, but I think that, again, imagery, just like Jan was saying with the Vietnam War, you see whatever you see on TV, like that's the reality that people see. And so it's really, really interesting now with the ability for people to manipulate and share information. It's just, the reality is everybody has their own reality is really where we're at. You kind of build your own reality of what you see. And I think, tying this back to the POW, Jan and I were talking before, like, think about not just the adversary gleaning information on the POW, but what if the adversary uses information and makes up information and presents a different reality to the POW? I mean, that's a great way to get into someone's head. If all of a sudden, they print out some fake news and give it to you and says, it looks like your president committed suicide, and, the US has fallen apart. And, that would just, how would you know any different if it's presented in such a way that it creates that emotion? It's really a scary thing to think about, but it's something that we have to at least acknowledge and understand.
Right. Well, you guys have given us a lot to think about here for sure. So this last question is maybe a little bit of a challenge to answer, but yeah, what recommendations would both of you have to our leaders as we contemplate these new possibilities of POWs and great power competition?
So
I think the first thing I would say is that the acknowledgement, acknowledging that this is something we need to understand. I mean, just like we talked about in the last podcast, the training, and the Army's good at training. We that's what we do. I think it's good to, I guess, assess and understand what our own personal digital footprints are, and then at least beginning with that, and then we can say, okay, let's run through this scenario. I mean, I've done the online training before of I haven't done SERE school, but there is some online training, force protection training of what do you do, basic things like tap codes, all the different things that are useful if you're captured. And including this of like, okay, now you're presented with fake news, or the adversary's got your Facebook profile, like just understanding it and going through that mental process of understanding what it is that can be done to you. That's the start. As far as policy changes or things, I'd have to think about that a little more, but I definitely say that understanding that this is a potential problem and figuring out how to incorporate this into training, and not just SERE training, but the training across the force, I think is the first step.
if I had the ear of a general officer, I would ask him to put 2 of his smartest aides. I like 2 because you can't just trust one person, and to read the old literature, even going back to like the early 1900s and this all the way up, because there's a lot of experience about POW things that's in the old books. I read a book with little, not on top, I've written about, it's called How to Abandon Ship. It was a book from 1943 to save people in convoy traffic that were torpedoed out on the Atlantic, how to properly abandon ship. Because the data showed that you were 3 times as highly likely to die for an improperly abandoned ship than being torpedoed. Because bad leadership, chaos, dropping lifeboats that just floats away, getting stuck on a sinking ship, saying that the chaos killed 3 times more. And that's, I also think, is important here, because I think just the awareness, as Stephen says, that people understand it, is avoidable casualties. Also at the point of capture, if people like realize what's going on and they avoid drawing attention and violence to themselves, I think there's a lot of experience looking at it. And once you look into all literature, then you see more about the POW situation and then apply it. Because in these old scenarios of Korean War, you'll have all these with mental manipulation, people to try to change their mind, indoctrinate people and so forth. And then they can lift that into digital context. But I think the old literature, there's a lot of gems out there. There's a lot of people have suffered, whose suffering was bad as it is, but it could be put to good use as they've been interviewed earlier.
All right, gentlemen. Well, once again, you've given us a lot to think about. And with that, Professor Jan Kallberg and Colonel Stephen Hamilton, thank you once again for being on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, John. Yeah, it's great to be on here again.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.